The morning mist clung to the windows of Kensington Palace as Royal Protection Officer James Mitchell completed his third security sweep of the day. At 42, James possessed the steady demeanor that came from years of military service before joining the Royal Protection Unit. His withered hands moved with practiced efficiency as he checked each lock, each window, each potential vulnerability in the sprawling palace grounds. The early November air carried the scent of dying leaves and the distant rumble of London traffic beyond the palace walls. James had always found these quiet moments before the royal family stirred to be the most peaceful part of his duties. No crowds of photographers, no scheduled appearances, just the responsibility of keeping Britain's most precious family safe while they slept. His radio crackled softly against his chest. "Mitchell, this is Control. Status report on the East Wing. All clear, Control." "Beginning interior sweep now," James responded, his voice barely above a whisper out of habit. Even at 6 in the morning, respect for the sleeping royal family demanded silence. James entered through the service entrance, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the polished marble floors. The palace's interior always struck him as a living museum, where priceless artwork hung beside family photographs, and centuries of history coexisted with the mundane realities of family life. A forgotten toy horse lay beside an antique table worth more than most people's homes. As he moved through the corridors, James reflected on his 5 years protecting this particular branch of the royal family. He had watched Prince George grow from a toddler into a serious young boy who asked thoughtful questions about everything. He had seen Princess Charlotte transform from a baby who slept through state dinners into a spirited child whose laughter could brighten the gloomiest of official functions. The family treated their protection officers with genuine warmth, something James had not experienced in his previous assignments with other royals. Prince William would ask about his daughter's university studies. Princess Catherine always remembered to inquire about his wife's recovery from surgery. Even the children, despite their privileged upbringing, showed remarkable consideration for the staff who surrounded them. James paused outside the nursery wing, checking his watch. 6:15. The children typically slept until 7, giving him time to complete his rounds without disturbing their rest. He continued down the hallway, noting that one of the decorative lights flickered intermittently. He would need to report that to maintenance. The sound of soft footsteps caught his attention. James immediately tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. No one should be moving through this section of the palace at this hour. He positioned himself against the wall, listening carefully to determine the direction and nature of the movement. A small figure emerged from the shadows near the library entrance. Princess Charlotte, dressed in pink pajamas and, clutching a well-worn stuffed rabbit, walked slowly down the hallway. Her dark hair fell in gentle waves around her shoulders, and her feet were bare despite the cold marble floors. James relaxed slightly but remained alert. Children often wandered during the night, and royal children were no exception. However, something about Charlotte's movements seemed different. She walked with purpose rather than the sleepy stumbling of a child seeking comfort after a nightmare. "Your Royal Highness," James said softly, stepping into view. "Are you feeling unwell? Shall I call for your parents?" Charlotte stopped and turned toward him. In the dim light of the hallway, James could see her face clearly. What he saw there made him take an involuntary step backward. The 7-year-old princess looked at him with eyes that seemed far older than her years, filled with a sadness and understanding that no child should possess. "I'm not unwell, Officer Mitchell," she said in a voice that was both her own and, somehow not. "I was hoping to speak with you actually." The formality of her speech struck James as unusual. Charlotte typically greeted him with enthusiasm, often sharing stories about her day or asking questions about his work. This measured, adult-like manner of speaking was completely foreign to her usual personality. "Of course, Your Highness. What can I do for you?" James kept his voice gentle, though concern began to gnaw at him. Charlotte walked to one of the ornate chairs that lined the hallway and climbed onto it with careful precision. She arranged her pajamas neatly and placed her stuffed rabbit on her lap, then looked directly at James with those disturbingly mature eyes. "Do you believe in things that cannot be explained, Officer Mitchell?" she asked. James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. In his years of service, he had encountered many unusual situations, but nothing had prepared him for this conversation. The child before him spoke with the measured cadence of someone much older, yet she remained unmistakably Princess Charlotte. "I believe many things in this world are beyond our understanding, Your Highness," he replied carefully. Charlotte nodded as if his answer satisfied her. "My family has lived in places like this for many, many years. Sometimes, when the walls are very old and many people have lived within them, the past doesn't always stay in the past." James found himself leaning forward despite his training to maintain professional distance. "What do you mean, Your Highness?" "I dream about people who lived here before," Charlotte continued, her small hand stroking her rabbit's ears. "But they're not really dreams, are they? They're memories that don't belong to me, but somehow I can see them anyway." The rational part of James's mind searched for explanations. Children had active imaginations. The princess had access to countless books about royal history. Perhaps she had overheard adult conversations about the palace's past. Yet something about her demeanor, the weight in her voice, the knowledge in her eyes, suggested this was more than childish fantasy. "Can you tell me about these dreams, Your Highness?" he asked. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, looking down at her rabbit. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "There was a little girl who lived here long ago. She was sick, very sick, and she was scared. She died in the room that's now my playroom." James felt his breath catch. He knew the history of Kensington Palace intimately, as all protection officers were required to study the buildings they guarded. He was aware that several royal children had died within these walls over the centuries, victims of diseases that modern medicine could easily cure. "She comes to see me sometimes," Charlotte continued. "She's not scary. She's just lonely. She wants someone to remember her name." "What is her name, Your Highness?" James asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Lady Margaret Beaufort. She was only 6 when she died. That was in 1847. Charlotte looked up at James with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sadness. "She says there are others too, but she's the only one who can talk to me because we're almost the same age." James's military training had taught him to remain calm in any situation, but this conversation was testing the limits of his composure. Lady Margaret Beaufort was indeed a historical figure, a young member of a minor royal line who had died of consumption in Kensington Palace in 1847. This was not information that would typically be shared with a 7-year-old child. "Your Highness, have you told your parents about these dreams?" James asked. Charlotte shook her head. "They have so many important things to worry about. They don't need to worry about dead little girls too. Besides, Margaret says grown-ups usually can't see or hear the old ones. Children can, sometimes, but they forget when they get older." The logical explanations continued to crumble in James's mind. The child's knowledge was too specific, her manner too convinced, her emotional response too genuine for this to be simple imagination or attention-seeking behavior. "Margaret told me something else," Charlotte said, her voice growing even quieter. "She said you would be the right person to tell. She said you have a kind heart and that you would listen without thinking I'm making it up." James felt a responsibility settling on his shoulders that went far beyond his official duties. This child, royal or not, was reaching out to him with something that clearly troubled her deeply. Whether her experiences were real or the product of an extraordinary imagination, her distress was genuine. "I believe you, Your Highness," he said simply. "What else did Margaret tell you?" Charlotte's face brightened slightly, as if a burden had been partially lifted. "She said the old ones are worried about something. Something that's coming to the palace. She doesn't understand what it is because she was too young when she lived here, but the older spirits are frightened." "What kind of something?" James asked, his protective instincts sharpening. "I don't know," Charlotte admitted. "Margaret says it has to do with secrets. Old secrets that someone wants to reveal. She says the spirits who lived here when they were grown-ups remember things that some people today would rather keep hidden." James felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. The royal family was no stranger to scandals and secrets. Throughout history, palace walls had witnessed everything from affairs to political conspiracies, from financial improprieties to cover-ups of various kinds. If Charlotte was somehow accessing historical knowledge through whatever means she described, the implications could be serious. "Has Margaret told you what these secrets are about?" he asked. Charlotte shook her head. "She only knows what she heard when she was alive, and she was too young to understand most of it. But she says there's a woman who wants to write a book. A book about things that happened here that were never supposed to be told." James's radio crackled, making both of them jump. "Mitchell, status report. You're overdue for check-in." "Excuse me for just a moment, Your Highness," James said, stepping a few feet away. "Control, this is Mitchell. All secure. Encountered a family member unable to sleep. Situation under control. Understood. Continue your rounds." When James turned back to Charlotte, she was standing beside the chair, looking suddenly very much like the young child she was. The mature demeanor had faded, replaced by the uncertainty of a little girl who had shared something important and was now worried about the consequences. "Will you tell my parents what I said?" she asked. James considered his options carefully. His duty was to report anything that might affect the security or well-being of the royal family. But he also recognized that this child trusted him, and how he handled this moment could determine whether she would continue to confide in the adults responsible for her care. "Your Highness, I think this is something your parents should know about, but I believe you should be the one to tell them when you feel ready. If you would like me to be there when you talk to them, I would be honored to support you." Charlotte nodded, looking relieved. "Thank you, Officer Mitchell. Margaret said you would understand." She turned to walk back toward the nursery wing, then paused and looked back at him. "Officer Mitchell? Margaret also said that the woman with the book has already been asking questions. She's been talking to people who used to work here. The old spirits say she knows something specific about this place, something that happened not too long ago." With that, Princess Charlotte disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, leaving James alone with more questions than answers. He completed his rounds mechanically, his mind racing as he tried to process what he had just experienced. By 7 o'clock, the palace was beginning to stir with its usual morning activity. Staff members moved quietly through the corridors, preparing for another day in the life of one of Britain's most watched families. James completed his shift report, noting only a minor maintenance issue with the hallway lighting. As he prepared to leave, James made a decision that would change everything. He would begin his own quiet investigation into the palace's recent history, looking for any indication that someone was indeed researching secrets that the royal family might prefer to keep buried. He had no idea that his investigation would uncover a web of deception, blackmail, and cover-ups that reached into the highest levels of the royal household. Nor could he have imagined that Princess Charlotte's unusual gift would prove to be the key to preventing a scandal that could have shaken the monarchy to its foundations. What James did know, as he walked through the palace gates into the crisp November morning, was that his role as a protector had just become far more complicated than he had ever anticipated. 3 days had passed since James Mitchell's extraordinary encounter with Princess Charlotte, and the conversation haunted his every waking moment. He found himself researching the history of Kensington Palace during his off-duty hours, cross-referencing the child's claims against historical records. To his growing unease, every detail Charlotte had shared proved accurate. Lady Margaret Beaufort had indeed died of consumption in 1847 at the age of 6. She had lived in rooms that were now part of the children's wing. Even more disturbing, James discovered that she had died specifically in what was currently Princess Charlotte's playroom, a detail that sent chills down his spine. James sat in his small London flat, surrounded by library books and printouts from historical websites. His wife Sarah had gone to bed hours ago, but sleep eluded him. The rational part of his mind continued to search for logical explanations. Perhaps Charlotte had overheard adult conversations about the palace's history. Maybe she had access to books or documentaries that detailed these historical facts. Yet the child's demeanor, the weight of sadness in her young eyes, and the specific nature of her knowledge seemed to transcend mere academic learning. His mobile phone buzzed with a text message from his partner, Officer David Chen, who worked the morning shift. "Something odd happened today. Can we meet for coffee before your shift? Important." James glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight, but David's message carried an urgency that made him respond immediately. The usual place. 20 minutes. The all-night cafe near Victoria Station served as an informal meeting place for security personnel from various government agencies. Its owner, a former military man himself, understood the need for discreet conversations and maintained a policy of asking no questions. David was already seated in their usual corner booth when James arrived. His normally composed colleague looked troubled, his coffee untouched despite the late hour. "Thanks for coming," David said as James slid into the opposite seat. "I needed to talk to someone who would understand the delicate nature of what I'm about to share." "What happened?" James asked, signaling the waitress for coffee. David pulled out a small notebook and opened it to a page filled with his neat handwriting. "I was doing routine background checks on recent visitors to the palace. Standard security protocol, nothing unusual. But I found something that doesn't make sense." He turned the notebook toward James. 3 weeks ago, a woman named Dr. Eleanor Whitman requested permission to conduct research in the palace archives. She claimed to be writing an academic paper on royal architectural history for Cambridge University. "That's not unusual," James said. "We get researchers fairly regularly." "That's what I thought initially." Her credentials checked out, Cambridge confirmed her employment, and her research request seemed legitimate. But when I dug deeper, I found inconsistencies. David's finger traced across his notes. "Dr. Whitman has published extensively on royal history, but her recent work has focused specifically on cover-ups and scandals within the royal household." James felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of scandals?" Her most recent book, published 2 years ago, exposed financial irregularities in the Duke of York's charitable foundation. Before that, she revealed details about the Queen Mother's involvement in suppressing information about a Nazi sympathizer within the royal circle during World War II. David closed his notebook. "This woman specializes in uncovering secrets that the royal family would prefer to keep buried." The connection to Charlotte's warning was too specific to ignore. James leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "Did you find out what specific research she conducted while she was here?" "That's where it gets interesting. According to the archive logs, she requested files related to staff employment records from the past 10 years. She also asked specifically about any incident reports or security breaches during that timeframe." David paused, studying James's face. "She was particularly interested in any documentation related to unusual occurrences or unexplained events within the palace." James felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in disturbing ways. "Did she find anything?" The archivist who assisted her, Mrs. Pemberton, mentioned that Dr. Whitman seemed to know exactly what she was looking for. She didn't browse through general files like most researchers. She went directly to specific years and specific types of records. David pulled out a second notebook. "I spoke with Mrs. Pemberton this afternoon. She remembered Dr. Whitman because of her unusual focus on employment terminations and disciplinary actions." "What kind of employment issues?" James asked, though he suspected the answer would only deepen his concern. According to Mrs. Pemberton, Dr. Whitman was particularly interested in staff members who had been dismissed without explanation or who had left their positions suddenly. She also asked about any reports of staff members claiming to have witnessed unusual phenomena within the palace. The coffee cup trembled slightly in James's hand as he set it down. The implications were becoming clear, and they were far more serious than he had initially feared. "There's more," David continued. "I checked with the security office about any unusual incident reports from the past decade. Most were routine matters, but there were 3 cases that caught my attention. 3 different staff members, all dismissed within the past 8 years, had filed reports claiming to have witnessed supernatural activities within the palace." James's military training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, but this revelation tested his composure. "What kind of supernatural activities?" The reports were similar in nature. All 3 staff members claimed to have seen or heard children in areas of the palace where no children should have been present. They described voices, footsteps, and, in one case, the actual appearance of a young girl in period clothing. David leaned across the table. All three were dismissed shortly after filing these reports, officially for unrelated performance issues. The pattern was becoming unmistakable. James realized that Princess Charlotte was not the first person to experience contact with spirits within Kensington Palace. The difference was that she was the only one whose position made dismissal impossible. Did Dr. Whitman get copies of these reports? James asked. Mrs. Pemberton wasn't certain, but she believed Dr. Whitman photographed several documents during her visit. The archive rules allow researchers to photograph materials for academic purposes. David closed his second notebook. James, there's something else. Dr. Whitman didn't just research historical records. She also requested a meeting with Prince William's private secretary. This new information sent alarm bells ringing in James's mind. A meeting with the private secretary would have given Dr. Whitman access to current information about the family's activities, concerns, and vulnerabilities. Did the meeting take place? James asked. It did, but the private secretary's office wouldn't provide details about the discussion. They cited privacy protocols. David paused, then continued in an even lower voice. However, I spoke with one of the secretaries who was present during the meeting. She remembered it because Dr. Whitman asked specific questions about the children's sleeping arrangements and whether they had ever reported nightmares or unusual experiences. James felt a protective rage building within him. The idea that someone was investigating the royal children's private experiences, particularly Charlotte's unexplained encounters, crossed every line of professional and personal decency. There's one more thing you need to know, David said. Dr. Whitman hasn't returned to Cambridge since her research visit. According to the university, she requested extended leave to work on a special project. Her colleagues believe she's writing a book that she expects will be highly controversial. The pieces of the puzzle were forming a picture that James found deeply troubling. Dr. Whitman appeared to be building a case around supernatural experiences within Kensington Palace, using dismissed staff members' reports as evidence. If she had somehow learned about Charlotte's encounters, either through investigation or insider information, she could be preparing to expose the young princess to public scrutiny and ridicule. David, I need to ask you to keep this information confidential while I determine the best way to proceed, James said. This could affect the security and well-being of the royal family in ways that go beyond normal protocol. Of course, David replied. But, James, if this woman is planning to publish sensitive information about the family, particularly about the children, shouldn't we alert the higher-ups immediately? James considered this carefully. Standard protocol would indeed require him to report any potential threat to the family's privacy or security. However, Charlotte's trust in him created a complication. If he reported the situation without first consulting with her and her parents, he could damage the very relationship that might be crucial to protecting her. Give me 24 hours, James said. I need to have a conversation with the family before we escalate this through official channels. David nodded, understanding the delicate balance required in royal protection work. Whatever you need. But, James, be careful. If this Dr. Whitman is as thorough as she appears to be, she may have sources of information beyond what we've discovered. As they parted ways outside the cafe, James realized that his role had evolved far beyond traditional security work. He was now protecting Princess Charlotte not just from physical threats, but from exposure and exploitation of experiences that she barely understood herself. The drive back to his flat gave James time to plan his approach. He would need to speak with Charlotte first, to understand better what she had experienced and to prepare her for the possibility that her encounters might become public knowledge. Then, he would need to brief Prince William and Princess Catherine about both their daughters' experiences and the potential threat from Dr. Whitman's research. What troubled James most was the possibility that Dr. Whitman's investigation had uncovered information that went beyond dismissed staff reports. If she had inside knowledge about Charlotte's recent encounters, someone within the palace was feeding her information. The thought that there might be a security breach within their trusted circle added another layer of concern to an already complex situation. As James finally settled into bed near dawn, he reflected on how dramatically his responsibilities had changed in just a few days. He had signed up to protect the royal family from external threats, but now he found himself guarding against something far more insidious: the exploitation of a child's trust and the violation of her most private experiences. Tomorrow would bring conversations that could determine not just Princess Charlotte's immediate well-being, but potentially the future of how the royal family dealt with matters that fell outside the realm of traditional security concerns. James fell asleep hoping that his years of military service and royal protection work had prepared him for the challenges that lay ahead. What he didn't know was that Dr. Whitman had already scheduled meetings with 3 former palace staff members who claimed to have their own stories about supernatural encounters within Kensington Palace. Nor did he realize that someone very close to the royal family had been providing Dr. Whitman with detailed information about the children's daily routines and private conversations. The clock was ticking, and James would soon discover that protecting Princess Charlotte would require more courage and creativity than any mission he had ever undertaken. James arrived for his shift the next morning with a carefully rehearsed plan, but Princess Charlotte found him first. As he completed his initial security sweep, she appeared in the library doorway, still in her school uniform from her morning lessons. Her usual bright demeanor seemed subdued, and the mature weight in her eyes had returned. "Officer Mitchell," she said quietly, "Margaret has been very upset. She says the bad lady came back last night." James felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean, Your Highness? What bad lady?" Charlotte looked around nervously, then gestured for him to follow her deeper into the library, away from the main corridors where they might be overheard. She climbed into one of the large reading chairs and pulled her knees up to her chest. "Margaret says there's a lady who can see the old ones, just like I can. But Margaret doesn't like her because she asks mean questions and tries to make the spirits tell her things they don't want to remember." Charlotte's voice was barely above a whisper. "The lady was here again last night, walking through the palace when everyone was asleep." James's mind raced. If Dr. Whitman had been on the palace grounds without authorization, it represented a serious security breach. However, Charlotte's claim that the woman could communicate with spirits added a dimension to the situation that was beyond his training or experience. "Your Highness, did you see this lady yourself, or did Margaret tell you about her?" James asked, trying to determine the reliability of the information. "I saw her," Charlotte said simply. "She was in the hallway outside my room around midnight. I got up because Margaret was crying, and when I looked out my door, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. She was holding something that made a clicking sound." "A clicking sound?" James felt his protective instincts sharpen. "Like when Papa takes pictures with his special camera." The lady was taking pictures of the doors and the walls. Charlotte hugged her knees tighter. "When she saw me, she smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. She asked if I was Princess Charlotte, and when I nodded, she asked if I had any imaginary friends." James's hands clenched into fists. The idea that an unauthorized person had not only gained access to the palace but had also directly approached Princess Charlotte filled him with rage and fear. "What did you tell her, Your Highness?" he asked, keeping his voice calm despite his internal turmoil. "I told her I had to go back to bed because my parents would worry if they found me awake. She said that was very wise, and that little girls who see things that aren't there should be careful who they tell about it." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. She knew, Officer Mitchell. She knew about Margaret and the others. "Margaret says she's been asking the spirits to tell her secrets, but most of them are too scared to talk to her." The situation had escalated beyond anything James had anticipated. Dr. Whitman had not only gained unauthorized access to the palace, but she had also directly threatened a 7-year-old child. The implications for security protocol were staggering. "Your Highness, I need to ask you to stay exactly where you are while I make some very important phone calls." "Can you do that for me?" James said. Charlotte nodded, but then grabbed his sleeve as he started to leave. "Officer Mitchell, Margaret says the lady isn't working alone. She says there's someone who helps her get into the palace, someone who works here." This revelation hit James like a physical blow. A security breach from outside was serious enough, but if Dr. Whitman had an accomplice within the palace staff, the threat level increased exponentially.
Did Margaret tell you anything else about this helper? James asked.
She said it's someone who has keys and knows about the family's schedule.
Someone who told the lady when everyone would be sleeping. Charlotte's voice became even smaller.
Margaret also said the helper doesn't believe in the old ones, but they want to help the lady write her book anyway because they're angry about something. James felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. He needed to secure the princess, alert the security team, brief the royal family, and identify a potential insider threat, all while handling information that came from sources no security manual had ever addressed. Your Highness, I'm going to ask your governess to stay with you here in the library while I speak with your parents.
It's very important that you don't leave this room or talk to anyone you don't know very well. Can you promise me that? James said.
I promise, Charlotte said solemnly.
But, Officer Mitchell, what if the lady comes back?
Margaret says she's planning to return tonight because she thinks I'll tell her more things then, but... The thought of Dr. Whitman returning to exploit Charlotte's trust and vulnerability made James's decision for him.
Protocol demanded that he alert his supervisors immediately, but the child's safety took precedence over procedures. Your Highness, that lady will not get near you again. I give you my word on that.
James spoke with a conviction that seemed to reassure Charlotte, though his own mind was already calculating the security measures that would need to be implemented immediately. James used his secure radio to summon Charlotte's governess to the library, then made his way quickly to the private family quarters where Prince William was reviewing his schedule with his private secretary.
The sight of James's grim expression immediately caught the prince's attention. Officer Mitchell, is there a security concern?
Prince William asked, dismissing his secretary with a subtle nod. Your Highness, I need to brief you on a situation involving Princess Charlotte that requires immediate family discussion and enhanced security measures, James said formally.
Prince William's expression shifted to one of sharp concern. Is Charlotte in danger?
She has been approached by an unauthorized individual who appears to be conducting research for a potentially damaging publication. The situation is complicated by factors that I believe require both parents to be present for the full briefing, James explained. Within minutes, Princess Catherine had joined them in the private sitting room. James found himself in the unprecedented position of needing to explain supernatural encounters, unauthorized access, and potential blackmail to two of the most protected people in Britain. Your Highnesses, what I'm about to share will sound extraordinary, but I ask that you allow me to present all the facts before making any judgments, James began. He recounted his conversations with Charlotte, David's research findings about Dr. Whitman, and the previous night's unauthorized encounter. He presented the information as objectively as possible, focusing on the security implications rather than the supernatural elements. Prince William listened with increasing tension, his jaw tightening as James described Dr. Whitman's direct approach to Charlotte. Princess Catherine's face grew pale when James explained the woman's apparent knowledge of their daughter's experiences. You're telling us that our 7-year-old daughter has been targeted by someone who specializes in exposing royal scandals, and that this person gained unauthorized access to our home and approached our child directly? Prince William's voice was controlled but carried an undercurrent of barely contained fury. That's correct, Your Highness. Additionally, the evidence suggests that Dr. Whitman has an accomplice within the palace staff, James confirmed. Princess Catherine spoke for the first time since the briefing began. Officer Mitchell, regardless of how Charlotte came by her information about this woman, the fact remains that someone gained access to our private quarters and approached our child. What immediate measures are you recommending? James had prepared for this question. I recommend immediate enhanced security protocols, including additional overnight guards, restricted access to the family quarters, and a comprehensive review of all staff with access to the children's schedules. I also recommend that we arrange for Princess Charlotte to speak with a child psychologist who has security clearance to help her process these experiences. And what about this Dr. Whitman? Prince William asked. What's being done to ensure she doesn't return? I'm requesting permission to coordinate with Metropolitan Police to investigate the unauthorized access and to issue formal warnings about trespassing on royal property. However, we need to consider the possibility that any aggressive action might accelerate whatever publication plans she has, James explained.
Princess Catherine leaned forward.
Officer Mitchell, you mentioned that Charlotte shared specific details about this woman's visit. Our daughter has always had a vivid imagination, but she's never been prone to fabricating stories, especially detailed ones about frightening experiences.
James recognized this as his opportunity to address the elephant in the room.
Your Highness, Princess Charlotte has demonstrated knowledge about the history of this palace that goes beyond what would be expected from her age and education. Whether the source of that knowledge is supernatural or otherwise, her information has proven accurate in every verifiable detail.
The room fell silent as the royal couple processed this diplomatic acknowledgement of their daughter's claims. Prince William finally spoke.
Officer Mitchell, our primary concern is Charlotte's safety and well-being. If she believes she's experiencing something supernatural, and if that belief is being exploited by someone with malicious intent, then we need to protect her from both the real threat and any additional distress these experiences might cause her.
I agree completely, Your Highness, James said.
I also want to assure you that Princess Charlotte has handled this situation with remarkable courage and intelligence. Her decision to confide in me potentially prevented a much more serious security breach. Princess Catherine stood and walked to the window overlooking the gardens where Charlotte often played. We need to have a conversation with our daughter about these experiences, but we also need to ensure that she doesn't feel responsible for the adult problems that have resulted from them.
May I suggest that I be present for that conversation? James asked.
Princess Charlotte has expressed trust in my understanding of the situation, and my presence might help her feel more comfortable discussing difficult topics.
Prince William nodded. Arrange it.
But first, I want a complete security review completed within the next 6 hours. If there's someone on our staff who's betraying our trust and endangering our children, I want them identified and removed immediately. As James prepared to leave and coordinate the security review, Princess Catherine turned back from the window. Officer Mitchell, there's one more thing. Charlotte mentioned that this woman plans to return tonight.
What are you going to do about that? James's expression hardened with determination.
Your Highness, if Dr. Whitman attempts to access this palace again, she'll find that we're ready for her.
And, this time, she won't be leaving with any photographs or information.
What none of them realized was that Dr. Whitman was already preparing for her return visit, armed with new information provided by her palace contact. She had learned about James's investigation and Charlotte's conversations with her parents. Most dangerously, she had discovered the specific room where Charlotte had her encounters with the spirits.
Tonight's break-in would not be a simple intelligence-gathering mission. Dr. Whitman planned to conduct a documented supernatural investigation in Charlotte's playroom, using equipment designed to record any paranormal activity. She intended to create evidence that would support her book's central claim that the royal family was covering up supernatural phenomena within their residence.
James had no way of knowing that his carefully planned security measures were about to be tested in ways that would challenge everything he thought he understood about protecting the royal family. The enhanced security measures James had implemented throughout the day created an almost military atmosphere within Kensington Palace. Additional guards were stationed at every entrance, security cameras were repositioned to eliminate blind spots, and access codes were changed for all electronic locks. Despite these precautions, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The conversation with Princess Charlotte and her parents had taken place in the afternoon, with James present as promised. Charlotte had shown remarkable composure as she explained her experiences to her parents, though she had insisted that Margaret had become too frightened to appear when adults were watching. Prince William and Princess Catherine had listened with the careful attention of parents trying to balance skepticism with support for their child. What had surprised James most was Princess Catherine's revelation that she herself had occasionally felt uncomfortable in certain areas of the palace, particularly late at night. She had attributed these feelings to the stress of royal duties, but Charlotte's experiences had made her reconsider whether there might be more to her unease. Now, as midnight approached, James was conducting his final security sweep before the overnight shift change. The palace felt different tonight, charged with tension that seemed to affect even the most skeptical staff members. Several guards had quietly mentioned feeling watched or hearing unexplained sounds during their rounds. James was checking the locks on the service entrance when his radio crackled.
Control to Mitchell. We have movement detected on the south perimeter.
Single individual approaching through the gardens. On my way, James responded, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. This was it, Dr. Whitman was making her promised return visit. James reached the south garden in time to see a figure moving carefully through the shadows between the manicured hedges. The person carried what appeared to be a large bag and moved with the confidence of someone familiar with the layout of the grounds.
This is Mitchell. I have visual contact with the intruder. Female, approximately 5'6", carrying equipment.
Moving toward the east wing, James reported quietly.
Should we intercept? Came the response from control. James made a tactical decision that would later prove crucial. Negative. Let her proceed to the building.
I want to see exactly what she's trying to access and how she plans to get inside. Dr. Whitman approached a service door that James knew required both a keycard and a numeric code. To his shock, she produced a keycard and entered a code that successfully opened the door. This confirmed his worst fears about inside assistance.
Control, the intruder has gained access through the east service entrance.
She has keycard and code access.
We have a confirmed insider threat, James whispered into his radio. Units moving to intercept, came the immediate response.
Negative, James said firmly. I'm going to follow her and determine her objective before we make contact. We need to know what she's after and how much she already knows. James slipped through the service door behind Dr. Whitman, maintaining enough distance to avoid detection while keeping her in sight. She moved through the corridors with purpose, heading directly toward the children's wing. As they approached Charlotte's playroom, James felt an unexplainable chill in the air. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and he could swear he heard the faint sound of children's voices echoing from somewhere ahead. Dr. Whitman stopped outside Charlotte's playroom and began unpacking her equipment. James could see sophisticated recording devices, electromagnetic field detectors, and what appeared to be thermal imaging cameras.
She was preparing to conduct a full paranormal investigation.
James positioned himself where he could observe her actions while remaining hidden. What he witnessed next would challenge his understanding of reality in ways that his military training had never prepared him for.
As Dr. Whitman activated her recording equipment, the temperature in the hallway plummeted.
James could see his breath forming clouds in the suddenly frigid air. The electromagnetic field detector began emitting rapid beeping sounds, and the thermal imaging camera showed several human-shaped figures moving through the playroom despite it being empty. Dr. Whitman seemed delighted by these readings, speaking quietly into a recording device. The electromagnetic activity is off the charts.
Multiple thermal signatures detected. This is consistent with previous reports of supernatural activity in this location.
Then, James heard something that made his blood freeze. A child's voice, clear and distinct, coming from the playroom. Please don't tell them our secrets.
We just want to be left alone.
Dr. Whitman stepped into the playroom, speaking in what she probably thought was a soothing tone.
I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to understand what happened to you. Can you tell me your name?
Margaret, came the small voice.
Please go away. You're scaring the others.
James realized he was witnessing something extraordinary and potentially dangerous. Whether or not he believed in supernatural phenomena, it was clear that Dr. Whitman was recording evidence that she intended to use against the royal family. Margaret, I know you talked to Princess Charlotte.
Can you tell me what you've told her?
Dr. Whitman asked, holding her recording device toward the empty air.
Charlotte is kind to us.
She listens when we're lonely.
But the grown-ups don't understand, and they get angry when children see things they can't see, the voice replied. James made his decision. He stepped into view, his hand on his weapon.
Dr. Whitman, you are under arrest for trespassing on royal property and unauthorized access to a restricted area. Dr. Whitman spun around, startled but not entirely surprised.
Officer Mitchell, isn't it? I was wondering when you would make your appearance.
Step away from the recording equipment and put your hands where I can see them, James commanded. Instead of complying, Dr. Whitman smiled coldly. I don't think you understand the situation, officer. I have recordings now that prove the royal family has been covering up supernatural activity in their residence.
This is going to be the story of the century.
The only story here is your illegal entry and attempted exploitation of a child, James replied, though the continuing electromagnetic readings and the persistent cold in the room made his words feel less convincing than he had hoped. Margaret, Dr. Whitman called out, ignoring James entirely.
Tell Officer Mitchell what you told me about the other secrets in this palace.
Tell him about the things the grown-ups did to hide the truth. The child's voice returned, but now it sounded distressed and frightened. The lady is making the others remember bad things. Things that hurt them when they were alive. Please make her stop.
James felt torn between his duty to arrest Dr. Whitman and an overwhelming urge to protect whatever presence was pleading for help.
The situation had moved far beyond normal security protocols. Dr. Whitman, you will cease this investigation immediately and surrender your equipment, James said with authority.
I will do no such thing, she replied defiantly.
I have sources within this palace who have been feeding me information for months. I know about the staff members who were dismissed for reporting supernatural encounters. I know about Princess Charlotte's experiences. And I know that the royal family has been covering up these incidents to avoid public scrutiny.
At that moment, several things happened simultaneously.
The temperature dropped even further, causing frost to form on the windows. The electromagnetic detector began emitting a continuous alarm. And, most dramatically, objects throughout the playroom began moving on their own. Books flew off shelves, toys rolled across the floor, and a child's easel toppled over with a crash. Dr. Whitman seemed thrilled by these manifestations, frantically trying to capture everything on her recording devices. James heard Margaret's voice again, but now it was joined by other children's voices, all speaking in unison, "Leave us alone.
Stop making us remember.
Stop trying to use our pain for your stories."
The paranormal activity intensified.
Windows rattled in their frames, and a cold wind seemed to blow through the room despite all openings being closed.
Dr. Whitman's equipment began malfunctioning, with several devices sparking and smoking. Enough!
James shouted, though he wasn't sure whether he was addressing Dr. Whitman or the supernatural forces that seemed to be protecting themselves.
This ends now.
He moved toward Dr. Whitman, intending to physically remove her from the room, when Princess Charlotte appeared in the doorway.
Despite the late hour and the chaos in the room, she seemed completely calm.
"Margaret, it's okay," Charlotte said softly.
"She can't hurt you if you don't let her." The paranormal activity immediately ceased.
The temperature began to return to normal, and the electromagnetic readings stabilized.
The sudden silence was almost as startling as the previous chaos.
Dr. Whitman stared at Charlotte with intense interest.
"Princess Charlotte, I'm Dr. Whitman.
I'm a researcher studying the history of this palace.
Can you tell me about your friends who live here?"
"I don't think you're a very nice person," Charlotte said with the direct honesty that only children possess. "Margaret says you try to make the old children remember things that hurt them."
"That's mean." James stepped between Dr. Whitman and Charlotte. "Your Royal Highness, please return to your room. Your parents are on their way."
But Charlotte remained in the doorway, looking directly at Dr. Whitman with eyes that seemed far older than her years. "The old children want you to know something important.
They don't want to be in your book.
Their stories are their own, and they don't want strangers to know about their private thoughts." Dr. Whitman knelt down to Charlotte's level, her recording device still running.
"But, Princess Charlotte, don't you think other people would be interested to know that you can talk to children from long ago? Don't you think that's something special that should be shared?"
"No," Charlotte said simply.
"Some things should stay private.
The old children died here, but they're not scary.
They're just lonely sometimes.
Making them famous won't help them, and it would hurt my family."
At that moment, Prince William and Princess Catherine arrived with additional security personnel.
The sight of their daughter calmly confronting an intruder while standing in a room filled with displaced objects created a scene that would be burned into their memories forever. "Charlotte, come here immediately," Princess Catherine said firmly but without panic. As Charlotte walked to her mother, Dr. Whitman made one last desperate attempt to salvage her mission. "Your Royal Highnesses, I have documented evidence of supernatural activity in this room. This is a matter of public interest." Prince William's voice was ice-cold as he replied. "What you have documented is your own illegal entry into our home and your attempt to exploit our daughter. You will be charged accordingly." As security personnel moved to arrest Dr. Whitman, she played her final card. "I'm not working alone in this. Someone in your household has been providing me with information about Princess Charlotte's experiences. Someone you trust has been feeding me details about your family's private life for months." The implications of this statement hung heavy in the air as Dr. Whitman was led away. James realized that tonight's events, dramatic as they had been, were only the beginning of a much larger investigation that would test the loyalty and integrity of everyone with access to the royal family. What troubled him most was the question that Dr. Whitman's arrest left unanswered: who within their trusted circle had been betraying the family's most intimate secrets, and what other damage had already been done. The investigation into the insider threat began immediately following Dr. Whitman's arrest. James found himself coordinating with Scotland Yard's Specialist Protection Unit, MI5 counterintelligence officers, and the palace's internal security team. The betrayal had shaken everyone's confidence in the security protocols that had protected the royal family for years. Princess Charlotte had been remarkably composed following the confrontation, though she remained close to her parents and asked frequent questions about whether the mean lady would return. Her parents had arranged for her to speak with Dr. Sarah Henderson, a child psychologist with security clearance who specialized in helping children process traumatic experiences. 3 days after the arrest, James was reviewing surveillance footage in the security office when his colleague David Chen entered with a grim expression. "We've identified the leak," David announced, closing the door behind him. "You're not going to like this." James looked up from the monitors. "Who is it?" "Mrs. Helena Vaughan, Princess Catherine's personal assistant. She's been in the position for 3 years and had access to virtually everything related to the family's private life," David said, placing a thick file on the desk. James felt a sick feeling in his stomach. Mrs. Vaughan was a trusted member of the household staff who had always demonstrated absolute loyalty to the family. Princess Catherine relied on her for everything from scheduling to personal correspondence. "What's the evidence?" James asked. David opened the file. Financial records show regular payments from Dr. Whitman to an account in Mrs. Vaughan's name, dating back 8 months. We also found encrypted communications on her personal computer detailing the family's daily routines, the children's sleeping patterns, and specific conversations about Princess Charlotte's experiences. The betrayal was even more extensive than James had feared. "Does she know we've discovered her involvement?" "Not yet. We've been monitoring her communications since yesterday. This morning she sent a message to Dr. Whitman's associate expressing concern about the failed operation and asking for instructions on how to proceed." James realized the investigation was far from over. "Dr. Whitman has associates?" "Apparently, she's part of a network of researchers who specialize in exposing royal scandals. They've been coordinating their efforts to gather information about supernatural experiences within royal residences across Europe." David pulled out additional documents. "Mrs. Vaughan has been providing information not just about our family, but about visiting royals and their staff as well." The scope of the security breach was staggering. James understood that they were dealing with something far more serious than a single rogue researcher seeking to exploit a child's unusual experiences. "What's the plan for confronting Mrs. Vaughan?" James asked. "Prince William wants to handle it personally. He's requesting that you be present during the confrontation, given your role in uncovering the threat," David explained. An hour later, James found himself in the formal sitting room where Mrs. Vaughan had been asked to meet with Prince William for what she believed was a routine scheduling discussion. The woman entered the room with her usual professional demeanor, carrying her tablet and daily planning folder. Prince William's expression was controlled but stern as Mrs. Vaughan took her seat across from him.
James positioned himself near the door, both to provide security and to prevent any attempt to flee.
Mrs. Vaughn, I want to give you an opportunity to explain your relationship with Dr. Eleanor Whitman and her research associates, Prince William said without preamble. The color drained from Mrs. Vaughn's face, but she maintained her composure.
Your Highness, I'm afraid I don't understand what you're referring to. Prince William placed a folder on the table between them.
This contains financial records showing regular payments from Dr. Whitman to your personal account, as well as copies of communications in which you provided detailed information about my family's private activities.
Would you like to revise your answer? Mrs. Vaughn's professional facade finally cracked.
Her hands trembled as she opened the folder and saw the evidence of her betrayal laid out in black and white. Your Highness, I can explain, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm listening, Prince William replied coldly.
Mrs. Vaughn took a shaky breath.
My daughter was diagnosed with leukemia 2 years ago. The treatments weren't covered by insurance, and we were facing financial ruin. Dr. Whitman approached me through a colleague and offered to pay for my daughter's medical expenses in exchange for information about the family's daily routines. James felt a mix of sympathy and disgust. While he understood a parent's desperation to help their child, the betrayal of the royal family's trust, particularly regarding their children, was inexcusable.
At first, she only asked for general information, Mrs. Vaughn continued. Scheduling details, travel plans, nothing that seemed harmful.
But, then, she became interested in Princess Charlotte's sleeping patterns and any unusual behavior the children might exhibit.
Prince William's jaw tightened. And you provided this information willingly?
I told myself it wasn't really harmful.
Dr. Whitman said she was conducting academic research into the psychological effects of living in historical buildings.
She claimed the information would be used to help other families in similar situations. Mrs. Vaughn's voice broke slightly.
I never intended for anyone to be hurt.
But, you knew Dr. Whitman wasn't conducting legitimate academic research when she asked for information about dismissed staff members and incident reports, James interjected.
Mrs. Vaughn nodded miserably.
By then, my daughter was in remission, and I tried to end the arrangement. But, Dr. Whitman said she would expose our relationship unless I continued to cooperate. She threatened to reveal that I had been selling information about the royal family. Prince William stood and walked to the window, his back to Mrs. Vaughn. You provided her with access codes and keycards. She said she needed to verify the historical accuracy of her research by examining the actual locations where incidents had occurred. She promised she would only take photographs and would never approach any family members directly. Mrs. Vaughn's voice was filled with regret. I never imagined she would break into Princess Charlotte's room.
The room fell silent as the full scope of Mrs. Vaughn's betrayal became clear.
She had not only provided information but had actively facilitated Dr. Whitman's access to the most private areas of the family's home. Prince William turned back to face her. Mrs. Vaughn, you have violated the trust my family placed in you and endangered the safety and privacy of my children. Your actions have caused distress to my daughter and exposed our family to potential blackmail and public humiliation.
Your Highness, I am truly sorry.
If I could undo what I've done, I would, Mrs. Vaughn said, tears streaming down her face. Your remorse doesn't erase the damage you've caused, Prince William replied. However, I want you to know that my family will ensure your daughter receives the medical care she needs, regardless of your actions.
A child should not suffer for her parents' mistakes. Mrs. Vaughn looked up in shock. Your Highness, I don't understand.
Princess Catherine, who had been listening from the adjoining room, entered and sat beside her husband.
Mrs. Vaughn, we understand that desperation drove your initial decision to accept Dr. Whitman's offer.
As parents ourselves, we can imagine the fear and helplessness you felt when your daughter was diagnosed. However, Prince William continued, your continued cooperation after your daughter's recovery, and your provision of access to our home, cross lines that cannot be forgiven. You will be dismissed from your position immediately, and criminal charges will be filed.
Mrs. Vaughn nodded, accepting her fate. What I did was wrong.
I betrayed people who trusted me and endangered children who never did anything but treat me with kindness.
I understand the consequences. James stepped forward.
Mrs. Vaughn, we need you to provide complete information about Dr. Whitman's network and any other individuals who may have received information about the royal family.
I'll tell you everything I know, Mrs. Vaughn said.
Dr. Whitman works with researchers across Europe who are building files on royal families. They believe that exposing supernatural experiences and cover-ups will undermine public support for monarchies.
Princess Catherine leaned forward. What specific information did you provide about Charlotte?
I told Dr. Whitman about Princess Charlotte's sleep patterns, times when she would wander the palace at night, and conversations I overheard about her mentioning imaginary friends. I also provided photographs of her playroom and other areas where she spent time alone.
Mrs. Vaughn's voice was filled with shame.
I convinced myself that it was harmless information, but I know now that I was wrong. The debriefing continued for another hour, with Mrs. Vaughn providing detailed information about Dr. Whitman's associates, their methods, and their long-term goals. By the end of the session, James understood that they had uncovered not just a single threat, but a coordinated effort to undermine royal families across Europe. Later that evening, after Mrs. Vaughn had been escorted from the palace under arrest, James found himself in conversation with Princess Charlotte. She had requested to speak with him privately, and her parents had agreed. "Officer Mitchell," Charlotte said as they sat in the library where their first conversation had taken place, "Margaret wants to thank you for protecting us from the mean lady."
"You don't need to thank me, Your Highness.
It's my job to keep you safe," James replied.
Charlotte shook her head. "Margaret says it's more than your job.
She says you believed me when other grown-ups might not have."
That made me feel brave.
James felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with professional pride.
"You were very brave, Your Highness.
You helped protect not just yourself, but other people who couldn't protect themselves." "Margaret also wanted me to tell you something important," Charlotte continued. "She says the old children aren't sad anymore because they know someone will listen if they need help.
They're not afraid of being alone now."
As James looked at Princess Charlotte, he realized that their extraordinary experiences had changed him in ways he was still discovering. His role as a protector had evolved beyond physical security to include safeguarding the emotional and spiritual well-being of a remarkable child who happened to be born into one of the world's most scrutinized families.
"Your Highness, will you continue to tell me if Margaret or the other old children need anything?" James asked. Charlotte nodded seriously. "I will.
But Margaret says they feel safe now because they know there are grown-ups who will believe children when they tell the truth about important things." 3 months later, Dr. Whitman was convicted of trespassing, attempted blackmail, and conspiracy charges. Her research network was dismantled by law enforcement agencies across Europe. Mrs. Vaughn received a suspended sentence in exchange for her cooperation with the ongoing investigation. Princess Charlotte's experiences with the palace spirits continued, but they became less frequent and more positive. She reported that Margaret and the other children seemed happier and more at peace. The family worked with Dr. Henderson to help Charlotte understand and process her unique experiences in healthy ways. James remained as Princess Charlotte's primary protection officer, a role that had evolved far beyond anything described in security manuals. His willingness to believe a child's extraordinary claims had prevented what could have been a devastating scandal for the royal family. Most importantly, Princess Charlotte learned that being different wasn't something to hide or be ashamed of. With the support of her family and the protection of people who cared about her well-being, she grew more confident in sharing her experiences when they seemed important or troubling. The Somber palace moment that had begun with disturbing news had ultimately strengthened the bonds between a royal family and the people dedicated to protecting them. It had also demonstrated that sometimes the most effective protection comes not from weapons or walls, but from the willingness to listen with an open heart to those who trust us with their deepest truths. Margaret and the other palace spirits were no longer alone, and neither was the brave little princess who had given them her friendship and protection. In a world where royal duties often required maintaining perfect public facades, Princess Charlotte had learned that authenticity and courage could coexist with responsibility and tradition. James continued to protect the royal family with enhanced awareness that security threats could come from the most unexpected sources, and that the most valuable intelligence sometimes came from the most unlikely witnesses. His experience had taught him that keeping an open mind and showing genuine care for those under his protection were just as important as any tactical training or security protocol. The palace remained a place of history and tradition, but it had also become a place where the past and present coexisted in ways that enriched rather than haunted the lives of those who called it home.